is true that I have an 11-year-old son named Saul. And to a lot of people's amazement, it is also true that my wife and I named him after Saul Kaplan. But if you really want to know my devotion to this man and his cause, you should know that my wife and I named our second son BIF. I'm all in, guys. So Saul calls me up and says, Dan, I want you to close. And I said, that's cool, I'll close. He says, but it has to be really good. Has to be really big. Has to be really exciting. So that led me inexorably to start this way. With Wilhelm Wundt. How many of you know who Wilhelm Wundt is? It looks like less than half of you. Let me explain who he is. He is a key figure in the story that I want to tell you today. And the story that I want to tell you today is the story of behavioral science. The science of studying how human beings behave. This man, who a biographer once described as austere, long-faced, and densely bearded. This man, brilliant description. Some of you thought this was actually Walt Mossberg's first selfie, but it's not. He's a key figure. Here's the story. I'm going to tell you the story of behavioral science and then where it's going to go. Before 1879, we didn't have a science of behavior. We studied, the way we understood human beings was with valuable ways, philosophy and literature and theology, but we didn't approach human behavior the way we approach other domains of science. We didn't use experiments. We didn't use the scientific method. We didn't study the behavior of human beings the way we studied physics and chemistry and biology. Wilhelm Wundt changed that. In 1879, he was the first person ever to call himself a psychologist. He was the first person ever to do research on human behavior. He set up a lab. In his very first experiment, he would play a sound, and then time, how long it took someone to hear the sound and press a telegraph key. And this kicked off the study of human behavior as a science, not as a philosophy, as a science. That makes it a very young science. And I don't think we realize that. A lot of us know about behavioral science, but we don't realize how young it is. Let me give you a couple of proof points on that. You guys are familiar with the Ngram viewer on Google, which is a way to search not all the books, but a huge number of books in the English language for certain words and phrases. Take a look at this. This is the incidence of the word behavior in English language books. Take a look at that. Until 1880, nobody ever talked even about the notion of behavior, and then all of a sudden, boom, there's a spike. Whoa, wait a second. We can study human beings the way we study other kinds of phenomena. Take a look at these specific domains of behavioral science. Economics, psychology, sociology, essentially non-existent until 1880. Think about that for a moment. This is a very young science. The science of human behavior is only 135 years old. That makes it younger, significantly, than the state of Rhode Island. And roughly the same age as Abe Vigoda. Footnote. Saul has a tradition where he wants the name Dalai Lama to be mentioned at every BIF. I want to start a new tradition where Abe Vigoda is mentioned now at every BIF. So, you're welcome. So, let's take the story forward from 1879. What happens? Scientists, psychologists, mostly social psychologists, economists, start studying human behavior in a systematic scientific way. But the study of human behavior doesn't really get too far into public consciousness, right? We might hear about people like B.F. Skinner. That might make the public consciousness. Maslow, maybe. Piaget. But it's generally, the study of human behavior as a science is generally done by academics, for academics, in journals like these. That goes on for about 100 years. Now, about 25 years ago, 30 years ago, something very interesting happens. Some elements of the media start writing about the science of human behavior. The New York Times starts writing about some of these studies buried in these journals. The New Yorker starts writing about some of these studies buried in these journals. The Atlantic, a little trickle into public consciousness. Then something else interesting happens. About 20 years ago, books start coming out. They're books, some of them by academics, but they're not for academics, they're for the rest of us. They're books about the science of behavior. Look at these books here, Dan Ariely and Malcolm Gladwell and Bob Cialdini and Adam Grant last year and Susan Cain. And all these books start coming out about the science of human behavior. Some of them by academics, some of them by journalists. Books that say we can understand how humans behave in a systematic way. And these books do extraordinarily well, many of them. They become big books. They become popular books. They make a difference in the world. Many of them sell widely, have a big influence on the public debate. Others of them remained obscure and barely noticed. So the question in this story that I want to address right now is, what's next? We have this trend line. You see where the trend line's going? Into more and more public consciousness. So let's take a look. What's going on? Some interesting things happen. Let's go to magazines. Pacific Standard. Anyone know this magazine? This is an awesome magazine. Deb knows it. Deb and I know it. It's an awesome magazine. It's a magazine, a popular magazine devoted to the science of human beings, human behavior. Not an academic journal. It's a magazine for all of us. Take a look at this. National Public Radio now has a correspondent, a terrific correspondent, whose beat, this is back when journalists had beats, I guess, this beat, his beat is human behavior. New York Magazine, which people often will read for, pizza ratings and restaurant listings and celebrity and fashion, now has something called the science of us. Whoa, wait a second. This is getting more and more. 135 years later, all of these things are standing on the hirsute shoulders of Wilhelm Wundt, all right? One guy did well on his SAT. It was Marty who did well on his SAT. So my question is, this is interesting, but there's something missing. Because what is the quintessential medium in the United States of America? What is the medium that is in our bloodstream, in our consciousness? TV. TV. Why isn't there something about behavioral science on primetime TV? This is the inevitable next step. Why doesn't this exist? Well, I'm glad you asked. Because it does, starting in November. For the last year, I've been working on a program, the first primetime program that brings behavioral science to television in what we hope is going to be a big way. It's a show called Crowd Control. It's going to debut in November on National Geographic Channel. It will debut a couple of months later in 111 countries and 45 languages. But no one has ever seen clips of this show until now. Saul and I have arranged to make you the first audience ever, truly, to see clips of this show. I expected at least a little bit more awe. Okay, thank you, thank you. I wasn't expecting awe, but I was expecting like a smidge of just gratitude, maybe. So let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about this program, then I'm going to show you some clips. So here's what we do. We take a problem, big problems and little problems, significant problems and just plain vexing problems. Then we go into the literature of behavioral science and say, how can we use the science to solve this? Then we do some design and technology. We go out there, do these experiments, test them, often finding out what happens with hidden cameras. So among the things that we're trying to do, we're trying to change people's behavior. We're trying to change behavior for the better. So among the things that we're doing, we've taken on about 50 challenges in this first season. And among the challenges are, how do we get people to take the stairs instead of the escalators? How do we get them to pick up their dog's poop? How do we get them to stop peeing in the pool? How do we get them to use sunscreen? How do we get them to drive the speed limit? How do we get them to recycle their trash? How do we get them to clear their lunch trays? How do we get them to stop using so many plastic bags? How do we get them to return their grocery carts? How do we get them to stop parking in disabled spaces? How do we get people out of an airplane safely? How do we get people to eat less? How do we help people find their car in an airport parking lot? How do we stop people from using cell phones in a restaurant? How do we get people to wipe down their gym machines? I had to go to a gym in Staten Island in the service of this. Thank you. How do we get people to hold the doors for others? How do we get people to give more money to charity? How do we get people to save energy by taking revolving doors? How do we stop jaywalking? How do we get people to wash their hands in the men's room? How do we get... Wow, all right. How do we get people to enjoy waiting in the DMV? How do we get people to wipe their feet? How do we stop double dipping? Let me give you a little taste here. So let me give you some things that we did. So we rewrote... here's a screenshot. I'm going to give you some real clips here in a moment. A screenshot, what we did is we went to the JetBlue University, the training facility for flight attendants down in Orlando, Florida, $10 million simulator, and we tested out with 3 different groups of participants different kinds of in-flight safety announcements, and then we crashed the plane to see how quickly people would get out. The big story, the big takeaway here, offering people prizes for paying attention doesn't work. Scaring the hell out of them in advance is extremely effective. There's some research, well-known research, showing that when there's a pair of eyes around, people often behave more ethically. It simulates the feeling of being watched. There's actually a very famous, those of you who know the research, it's a very famous study out of the University of Newcastle where there was a common break room and there was a common coffee pot and there was a sign saying put some money in the coffee, put some money in the till when you pour yourself coffee. And not that many people did it, and when they installed a pair of eyes, suddenly people started doing it. So we decided, so of course we brought it to a food court in New Jersey to see if we could get people to clean their lunch trays. Peeing in the pool. Took an idea from Rio, where in Rio, Carnival, people are drunk and peeing all the time. The public urination is a big issue, so what they did is they devised some toilets where the pee generated electricity, sort of hydroelectric power, that was then stored in batteries and used to power some of the trucks and other things in Rio. So we took this idea to the Jersey Shore, the Rio of the Eastern Seaboard, and saw if we could get kids to pee and use their pee to power an ice cream machine that's adjacent to that. When people walk down the street and use their cell phone and get in their way, we said, what if we just put up on the streets of Washington, D.C., cell phone-only lanes? And get some Confederates using cell phones to walk in those lanes. Will the social norm of following the lane actually make a difference? And then we kind of had the double dippers. You'll have to wait for episode 7 to see the clever things we did. So what I want to do now is actually show you a couple clips. All right, it's like each one's like about a minute and a half. Give you a taste of what this is. But believe it or not, it's when I'm going to set up these clips a little bit. We're going to see them, and then there's actually a really, I think, a pretty significant point that I've heard made throughout the folks speaking here today, even throughout the incredibly interesting men who preceded me, that I think I want to leave you with. So the first thing that we did, let's go to, I'm going to set, don't play yet, I'm going to set up this clip here. New Orleans, we go to New Orleans, Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street's a pit. Has anybody ever been there? Good God. Okay, so you got a big problem there, is that everybody is wasted. And it's like you can just carry around alcohol and drink it on the street. And so there's a huge litter problem there. Even though there are garbage bins everywhere, there's a huge litter problem. So we said, what can we do? There's a lot of research showing how much people respect certain social norms. So if something already has litter in it, people are much more inclined to litter because they figure everyone else is doing it. So we said, how can we change the social norm? And how can we take something as mundane and uninteresting as throwing away your trash and make it slightly more engaging? So if you can roll this a little snippet of some of the things that we did. If you could roll that, please, Chris.
We're tricking out some garbage cans and transforming them into a gigantic litter game.
This screen here will display a trivia question. Is it A, B, or C? Simple as that.
But will it really help keep the streets trash-free?
What's the answer to this one? Quick! I don't know. Try. B.
Are you playing? Here, I got garbage. I was about to throw my garbage on the ground, but decided I would play the game instead. I think any solution to getting garbage off that street is amazing.
People were having all this fun, so I wanted to try it myself. And I did, and I got the question right, and I was so excited.
It's working pretty well. But there's still trash being dropped on the street, which signals to others that it's okay to do the same.
Research shows that offering people tangible rewards, things they can touch, for simple short-term tasks can be extremely effective. Let's see if it works here.
We've reprogrammed the machine. Now each right answer wins a prize ticket. But here's the trick. The machine only gives out one ticket for a right answer, but you need 5 for a prize. Simple, but will anyone figure it out?
Here you go. How many you got?
5.
All right. 1, 2, 3. Hey, what do you got?
I have some tickets.
All right, here you go. Here's your hat for helping clean up New Orleans. Congratulations. Thanks so much. So long.
And look, after a while, something really interesting starts to happen.
We were looking for litter around the streets to put in it so we could play. You should be paying us. We're like street cleaners.
So that ended up working out pretty well. Although that last scene there, I have 2 teenage daughters, and I said, if I ever see you drunk on national television, you're going to get no. So that's one idea that we had. I'll give you another one that we did. How about parking in disabled spaces? I went down to Austin, Texas, and I spent some time with some advocates for the disabled down there. Now, I would never park in a disabled spot. Truly, I wouldn't even think of it. And I would think, oh, this is not a real problem. But we drove around for a day, and it is. It's unfreaking believable. People park in these spots, okay? So how do you stop this? So we did one thing that's kind of cool, where we sort of vigilante justice, where we found somebody who parked in a disabled spot and then parked them in a van full of people in wheelchairs and unloaded. But the other one that we did is basically, the question that we wanted to ask in a behavioral science way was, can we use empathy to change people's behavior? And there's a lot of research that actually we should give people more credit for being empathic. So let's take a look at this solution in it's about an 80-second clip. Each of these signs has a photograph of a local person who needs to use one of these disabled spaces. The question we're asking is, will a direct appeal from them to drivers make any difference?
I don't think that violators can just pretend that what they're doing isn't affecting anyone when they come face to face with Mac, Nancy, and other disabled drivers. It's no longer a victimless crime.
All right, guys, I got something to show you.
Oh, not bad.
Very nice.
I like it.
I like it.
Yeah.
That says it all right there.
Do you think it will work?
I think it'll make them think twice. I think it'll make them understand that there's somebody that has a disability in each one of these spaces.
Let's see what happens.
When you pull into a space and you see that sign, it registers with you that you are parking in a space that really is designed for someone that really needs it.
I thought people in the wheelchair needed a lot more than I did, so I parked, 5 cars down and walked.
You park in the spot and you think you're taking someone else's spot who really needs the access. We're lucky we can walk. You could park far away, and we probably need the exercise coming out of the restaurant.
Empathy wins, and this time the face-off works. After a month of surveillance, we haven't recorded a single person parking illegally.
I'm actually psyched about this because I think this is a very, very practical solution. If it works here, it can work in a lot of other places for a very low cost with a very big effect.
So that's empathy. Now I'll give you one more. I'll give you one more, and what I like about that is that it's rooted in some good social science. It's a very easy solution. It's a very, very easy solution for municipalities to use. And the goal of this thing is actually not only to we got to make entertaining television to sell against advertising, but to sell advertising against. But ultimately, it's to give people ideas for how to change things in their own world. I'll give you one last one, then we'll wrap up. It goes with this. So we're in New Orleans, and New Orleans has a terrible problem with bike theft. There's certain parts of New Orleans that are easily accessible on bikes, harder to access through cars, and yet there's a huge amount of bike theft. The police are overworked down there. So how do you solve this problem? Well, in India, where there was also, one city in India where there was also a shortage of police officers, they tried this very intriguing solution. They did cardboard cutouts of cops, life-size cardboard cutouts of cops, so that if you look from a distance, it actually, you know, if you can't, whoa, there's a cop there, I better go somewhere else. The other thing that it does is that there is some research showing that we're actually fairly susceptible to various kinds of symbols and iconography of authority and all kinds of other things. And so simply the symbol of authority we thought might deter people. We decided to up our ante a little bit by looking at some research in, some fascinating research about aggression. It turns out that the measure of a man's face, the ratio of the width of his face to the height, this part of his height, is actually a marker for aggression. And it ends up predicting a lot of behavior. For instance, this one group of researchers took simply the photographs of the players in the National Hockey League, measured their facial width to height ratio, and that predicted who was going to spend time in the penalty box. It's really quite extraordinary. So we said, so what we did is we got some actors, and I measured their faces, and then we tried this in New Orleans. Chris, one last clip to roll, please.
I'm creating my own police force using life-size cardboard cutouts. And I've chosen an actor specifically for the shape of his face. Research shows that men with especially wide faces are considered more aggressive. Our theory is that the aggressive look and blue uniform might scare off thieves from afar and remind those up close of authority and the potential consequences of stealing.
Awesome. Amazing. Yeah. Scary. We've got 10 of these. It's our own mini police force. Let's put them to work.
My cardboard cops are all on patrol.
Time for an update on how our cardboard cops did.
We use life-size photographs to increase the number of cops in an area notorious for bike theft. But did our virtual police presence stop any thieves?
There's good news and bad news. The good news, thieves were definitely distracted from stealing the bikes. The bad news, that's because they ended up stealing the cutouts.
And our hidden cameras caught them red-handed.
So, not everything works. And that's my point at the very end of this, and I think at the very end of BIF, which is this. We hear a lot about big, hairy, audacious goals. We hear a lot about moonshots, and I'm all for those, but I've become more and more just, I guess, really through aging, I think, more than anything else, a big believer in the power of small experiments. Just trying small things and seeing if they work. And what's great right now is that we have this body of science helping us at least make better predictions about how human beings are going to behave. And so my charge to you as we end this incredible conference is this. Take a look at this research, try to understand how people behave, and then try a small experiment in your own world and see what happens, all right? Just try a small experiment. You might get your cop stolen, but you also might change the world. Thanks.